But the Section 108 loan, again, really gives us dollars to move full speed ahead on this project to tackle it. And as you can see, it's a massive project. This building alone, 1.6 million square feet of dinosaur buildings that we will be reclaiming this space. And as we move forward, though, we believe that good planning makes for good development. And we don't want to just tear buildings down. We want to put new things up in its place.
Is there anything you should know about it? And I told him
There was once, in South Bend, a great internationally renowned company named Studebaker. It was a manufacturer of vehicles, first wagons, then cars, from the 1850s to the 1960s. Building a fine reputation of producing a quality product, stylish and well-designed and reasonably priced, they eventually grew to become the largest wagon manufacturer in the world, and finally, the fourth largest auto producer in the United States. Their wagons opened up the West, and their cars and trucks served in every U.S. military endeavor from the Civil War to Korea. For many generations, Studebaker would be the company that people wanted to work for. It was a local operation that grew with South Bend. Many families had several members working. To most, it was a job for life. They paid well, had good benefits, and there were plenty of opportunities to get ahead. The company's product was valued throughout the world, and the workers were proud of it and to be part of the company. Of course, there were some rough times: fires, depressions, financial troubles, a few poor business decisions, but nothing, until the very end, could keep the company down. Something always came along to advance their growth: the Western expansion, military orders, and new innovative car technology and design. The company held sound business principles and, above all, appreciation and respect of their customers' requirements. Studebaker built wagons that proved to be immensely strong, and later their cars were said to be designed for life, some of the toughest, most rugged vehicles built by any manufacturer. The company grew alongside of South Bend. Homes by the thousands were built in the city areas surrounding the plants. Throughout the 19th and into the 20th century, South Bend established a reputation for having an excellent work ethic. Many manufacturing concerns were attracted to the area, and with the international sale of its products and its reputation for quality workmanship, South Bend could, by the 1920s, have world famed as its city slogan. This period, from about 1920 to 1940, was the peak of Studebaker's production and growth. The 1920s were a boom time in the United States, and Studebaker was there to benefit from the good times after World War I. Miles of paved roads, the growth of cities, the start of tourism by auto, and the new wealth and free time of the American worker were a blessing to the auto industry. Many of these remaining buildings were built during this period. This was also the period when the last wagons were built and the company switched to only making cars and trucks. Before 1920, horse-drawn vehicles were produced at a ratio of 2:1 to cars. But by 1920, Studebaker introduced a truck line to replace the wagon production, and from that time on, only cars and trucks were made. In the company's golden era of horse-drawn vehicle manufacturing, the 1850s to the period shortly after the First World War, Studebaker made every type of vehicle imaginable, from standard farm wagons in more than a dozen variations to buggies, surreys, buckboards, runabouts, and sulkies. The company was proud of the quality built into everything they made. Wheels were made of Indiana white oak, steam-fitted to the hubs, and were said to be as strong as steel. Owners were given advice on the care and maintenance of their carriages. Always wash mud and sand off after going out in the rain. Wipe rain off so as not to leave spots. Keep the axles well oiled. Tighten loose bolts, and always keep the wooden parts painted and dry. Studebaker really cared about their products and sold the owner a wagon, and later a car, that when well maintained would give years of faithful service. Everything went well through the 1920s. Plant expansion was continuous, and the company was producing 200,000 vehicles a year until 1929, the start of the Depression. For the first time in its history, there were wage cuts. Workers were laid off, and several parts of the plant were shut down. The company went into receivership in March 1933, but by the end of the year, they were back and making a profit. Introduction of the well-designed and stylish Champion helped Studebaker once again to have healthy sales and a sound financial footing. Studebaker was a major supplier to the military during World War II. In value of government contracts awarded to U.S. companies, they were among the top 30. Studebaker got off to a great start after the war's end in 1945. They had planned well, being among the first to introduce new post-war models and fresh and innovative styling. Things went well until the early 1950s, when massive output and cost-cutting by Ford and GM started to hurt Studebaker's sales. A merger with Packard helped neither company, but the cars of the mid to late 50s were well built and attractive, such as the Commander, Hawk, the Champion, and the President. Always trying to succeed, by the 1960s, the company was again in financial trouble. The new Lark, the first compact car, was introduced in 1958. But the next year, the Big Three bought out their version of the smaller, lighter, more efficient car, and Lark's sales declined. Studebaker tried hard to survive, fighting until the last. In 1962-63, a Hawk redesign was offered, and a high-performance, radically styled new car, the now legendary Avanti, was introduced. If the company had survived long enough to fully develop the Avanti, its styling would have been used to create a whole new series of advanced, cutting-edge improvements throughout the whole line, and there would have been many more chapters written in the story of Studebaker. Sales picked up in 1962, but it was too little, too late. The sad end came in December 1963, when the last South Bend-made car rolled off the assembly line. 4 years later, the last Canadian-built Studebaker was offered. After over 110 years, the great South Bend factories were silent, slowly crumbling, empty and still, fading away more and more, until they were just a memory of what could have and should have been. The growth of the Studebaker factory site throughout its history was consistent and steady. In the area just south of downtown South Bend were new assembly plants, foundries, stamping presses, spring and chassis units, power plants, and offices. Sample Street, still a busy four-lane thoroughfare serving much of South Bend's commercial southwest side, ran through the factory site, which was designated Plant 1, north of Sample, and Plant 2, south. By 1930, the area covered over 200 acres and employed more than 23,000 workers. Most of the main buildings were 3 to 6 stories tall and were strongly built and reinforced to handle the stress of heavy manufacturing machinery. As the years went by, the Studebaker plants were in a constant state of change, building, tearing down, and repurposing as they expanded and increased production. Several fires in the company's history were also a reason for new building. In 1872, many buildings were damaged, and in 1874, another fire hit the company, pushing to the limits the capabilities of the South Bend Fire Department as they struggled to reach the tallest buildings, some 6 stories high, with their hoses. This was an opportunity to reconfigure the plant layout, and within 2 years, Studebaker was bigger than ever, now covering almost 100 acres. By the turn of the century, Studebaker was producing more wagons than any other factory in the world by almost double, with over 1 million vehicles in daily use. With the gradual switch over to motor vehicles, at first made in plants not in South Bend, through World War I era, growth was rapid. These were some of Studebaker's best years, when total plant area exceeded 7 million square feet. Studebaker buildings were considered to be very modern and were purpose-built for specific operations. They made use of large windows and skylights, which, along with high ceilings and efficient ventilation, helped create a comfortable and pleasant workplace. As soon as electric lighting was developed, they used arc lights to augment the natural light, and later, thousands of the new Edison electric light bulbs. Before the 1930s, most of the company's profits went right back into plant construction. This gave Studebaker an advantage over other manufacturers, enabling the company to weather the worst years of the Depression with little overhead costs for new facilities. Throughout the period before 1930, Studebaker had a diverse array of contributors for its car output. Several small manufacturers of proven quality and reputation were acquired by the company from various cities in the region. Eventually, all manufacturing was concentrated in South Bend, leading to tremendous growth in one consolidated place. Located on the main rail line connecting New York City and Chicago, the transport of new cars was as simple as loading them into specially designed boxcars, usually painted Studebaker in large script letters on the side, and off they went to all parts of the United States. Studebaker offered electric cars in its first years, as well as its first gas-powered cars. A truck line was first offered just before World War I, and various models played important roles in the war, sold to both the United States military and its allies. Studebaker had also made equipment for the Union in the Civil War, and some was captured and used by the Confederates. Some of the Studebaker ambulances designed in this era also saw service in the Spanish-American War in 1898. The company even made gun tractors and gun carriages and shipped thousands of wagons to the British during World War I. Many of Studebaker's tractors, which had tank-like threads, used standard automobile 6-cylinder engines and borrowed many driveline components from the auto line. In World War II, much more was built for military use, including thousands of trucks which were sent to Russia, where they were highly praised, used, and copied for many years after the war. Not remembered by some today was the fact that Studebaker also built aircraft engines for many heavy U.S. bombers, including the famous workhorse B-17, for which they produced over 60,000 Wright Cyclones. The aircraft factory alone covered over 20 acres. Some of the trucks made for war use were tested on the sandy beaches of Lake Michigan, an ideal area about 40 miles from South Bend that also had many sand dunes to climb. Many Studebaker trucks were captured by the German forces, which found them almost indestructible, Unlike the complex and hard-to-service Mercedes models they used, the Studebakers were dependable and ran well in the cold and ice of European winters. They didn't need special lubricants, were easy to start in extreme cold, and could run on low-octane fuel. Studebaker didn't miss a beat. 6 months before the war ended, they were repurposing, building, and retooling for the coming civilian market. By most accounts, Studebaker was a fine place to work. Like all auto plants in the pre-robotic days, all cars were actually built by hand. Parts were screwed, bolted, welded, and glued by individual workers on assembly lines, slowly shaping and forming the finished car by hand. In the really early days, before World War I, cars were even painted by hand with brushes. Thousands of assemblers stood all day, putting together components from various factories on the plant site. Chassis, springs, engines, and interiors were all brought together for the finished product. Studebaker foundries made over 600 tons of engine block castings a day. Many employees were related. Often a brother, cousin, or even someone's father could recommend an individual for a job. Studebaker had a great apprentice program. Beginners were trained with a variety of teaching and learning skills and were gradually given more and more responsibilities as their skill level progressed. There were ample opportunities for advancement, and one could be confident that they would have a job for life if they wanted to stay on. This arrangement guaranteed employee loyalty and a belief in the company, qualities that resulted in a win-win situation for both. For auto manufacturers, the most special time of the year was the rollout of the new models. Carefully planned, they were festive events taking place in dealer showrooms across the nation. For the Studebaker employee, it was a chance to see what they would be building for the next year. Feedback from assembly workers was noted throughout the model year, and hopefully corrections were made on the new models. Of course, customer complaints and comments were vital to making improvements. Studebaker would wisely and cost-effectively use many of the same parts and components designs for many years, confident in their proven quality. Doors, bumpers, fenders, roof panels, and many chassis units were time-tested and interchangeable between models. Even 1958's new Lark used center body sections from previous year's cars, keeping costs down on new design time and the considerable expense of making new dies. All Studebaker products spent time at the proving grounds west of South Bend. Covering over 800 acres, cars were put through every hill, road surface, grade, and speed test possible. It was the first completely purpose-designed outdoor proving ground in the United States. Studebaker employed many women throughout its history. These were the days when women were not considered for some of the aspects of manufacturing that in today's auto factories are a common sight, with women working the same job side by side with the men. Many women worked in the offices and the dining rooms and kitchens, as well as the company's medical facilities. One area where women did much of the work was in the upholstery section, working with sewing machines. Women had, like the men, social and activity clubs and groups as well. A great company, such as Studebaker was, knew that employees need more than just a good job with decent pay. A better product comes from the worker who is not only happy with the work, but feels the company really cares about their life as a whole. One of the points of pride for Studebaker was their company band. With over 60 members in the 1920s, they were an important employee activity that performed at various functions and events. Company support and encouragement of the interest of their employees carried over to increased loyalty and pride in the product. Studebaker would have employee parades on occasion, with banners and placards indicating plant and department affiliations, and they went by in the thousands. Parades and festivities and holidays in South Bend were one of the great opportunities to show off the band as well. Studebaker, like most corporations still do, sponsored and encouraged participation in various sports. There was the baseball team, plus a basketball team, and at times various other sports were included. Most games were played with other local companies, and occasionally there were competitions from other teams in the region. Dining facilities were provided for employees, with food prepared on site. In the 1920s, the employee restaurant was in the Stores and Assembly Building on the 4th floor. The administration building also had its own executive cafeteria and its own chef. This is what remained of the Studebaker plant sites 1 and 2 in 1984. By 2006, most of Plant 1 was gone. Plant 2 lingered on for a few more years until finally it had been all demolished and the plan for Ignition Park was set in motion.
I went to Studebaker's primarily because I was just starting a new family. I was trying to farm and make money, and just wasn't enough money coming in on the farm, so I decided I'd like to make some money somewhere else in addition to the farm. My dad was hired in at Studebaker's to take Mr. Warwick's job when he retired, and his job then would be to be supervisor over the apprenticeship program at Studebaker's. And the apprenticeship program at Studebaker's was something that wasn't easy to get into, and it was a very valuable program for Studebaker's for quality control and that sort of thing. So I went to Studebaker's with the help of my dad, who used to work there before I went there, and he got me a job there as a relief man at Studebaker's to relieve welders, finishers, and grinders, and soldering people on the roof line. And it turned out to be a good job. However, we worked hard to try to keep up with the line because we couldn't produce roofs fast enough. The back corners of the roof is called the earmuffs, and those earmuffs were welded to the major panel of the roof itself. And so by welding those on with a wire welder, was something I think Studebaker was just getting into, was using a wire welder. These guys that were doing the welding tried to hurry things up and get their quota out, and consequently they got things a little bit too hot, and he was having trouble with warpage of the metal, and this created a lot of extra work for the finishers as the roof went around on the carousel where it was finished out and produced for the car itself. When I was working at Studebaker's, I didn't have any money to speak of, but as I look back on it, Studebaker's was a fine vehicle, and I wished I'd have had some money. I would have bought a nice car and kept it, but that's hindsight, of course, but that's what would be nice now, because I belong to Studebaker Drivers Club, and it's hard to find a nice Studebaker anymore that you can restore and make it into a nice car. Those nice cars are pretty well taken up. I guess if I had to do it over again, why I would try to purchase a car while I was at Studebaker's. I could have got a discount. And you always get a radio if you order a car while you're working there, whether you want one or not. And you get a little special attention to your car.
I hired in September of 1963, and I was gone by November. I was 18 years old, and they paired us off with an old-timer. So the old-timers were showing the new people how to do their jobs. I had a application in at Uniroyal, and that night, before I even heard from Uniroyal, my uncle called me. He worked at Studebaker's, He told me, get down to Studebaker's tomorrow, put in an application, you will get the job. I went, I got hired in, and the first job they put me on was doing door rubbers, door and trunk. Some guy came up to me, he said, I'm going to bump you. They have plant-wide bumping rods. And he did. And I thought, well, what's going to happen now? Am I out of a job? I said, no, we're moving you up the line. And they gave me a job where I hooked up the heater door. It was a wire or a thing I had to clip. And then one of the old timers was coming in and put in the brake master cylinder. And I would take a bolt, put it in, and put a nut on it, and screw it down with a ratchet wrench. It wasn't every day where you'd get a hawk for your job. But when you counted the cars back, and you saw that you were going to get a hawk on your next job, you went over to, it was like a basket, and you picked out the trunk lock. You dipped it in lubricate, and you walked behind the car and put it in and turned it. That was it. We did 60 cars an hour. And we were able to do that because there were 4 guys doing the exact same job I was doing. When I was hired, 2 of my first cousins was hired. So we started work the same day. I never got to see what they did. I know they worked in the floors below me.
I worked at Studebaker's from 1956 to 1963 when they closed the doors. I was an electrician, and so I worked wherever they needed me in all the different plants and buildings of the corporation. My most memorable part of my job at Studebaker's was there was 52 journeyman electricians. I was one of them, and you know, that was my first exposure to the different ethnic groups. In South Bend we had the Polish and the Hungarians and the Italians and the Serbians and all the different groups that were represented in the electrical group. And that was my first experience working with all these different type of folks. It was very interesting and I really enjoyed it. The company was great to work for. They really treated the employees unbelievably good with their system they had for promotions and the way they treated their employees with schooling and training. My favorite aspect of working at Studebaker's had to do with how well I was treated. We served as electricians in every department within the corporation, whether it was in the offices where the phone reception people were, to the foundry, to the machine shop, to every aspect of it, and you were treated like royalty everywhere you went. We really enjoyed it. Electricians had it made. I would think it would really be great if every major corporation in America today would know how well Studebaker's treated their employees and would adopt those policies and procedures, because I think it would change our whole nation in reference to how people act and are treated, and their vehicles were a reflection. When I worked there and you bought a car, you could follow your new car being manufactured down the production line. And I want to tell you, those folks would not let that car go past their workstation without it being perfect. They would fight with you if you tried to cheat or get a car or a part that wasn't made right. And I was so proud of that. This is my badge that I had when I worked at Studebaker's that you had to use to get into the plant and then from building to building to building. It was a special badge that only the electricians had all the badges were marked, and you were only allowed in the buildings and the parts of the factory, security-wise, that you were supposed to be in. One of these pins here is for 5 years of service for me, and the other one is 15-year badge for my father. I love the Studebaker cars. I still have a 1936 Dictator, which is the year I was born. It's an old car that like John Dillinger drove, and I have a 55 Speedster President, which was really a nice car. I have a Studebaker Avani, serial number 5, and I have had several other Studebaker cars, including the Lark. They all served me very well, and I really enjoyed them, and I wish we were still in business.
I had an application to be an apprentice. I had the radio on, and they said Studebaker's is closing. And I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken because Studebaker's employed a lot of people. And with them gone, it would take a lot of people out of the chance of having a job. When I got home, I turned on TV, and they showed the guys walking out of the plant there, and the newspaper people interviewed them, and the guys didn't even know it. The guys didn't even know that they are closing. So they told everybody but the people that work here.
By 2008, most of the remaining buildings of Plant 2 had been demolished. A few lingered on for a few years, until they too were taken down, their bricks broken and ground up. Finally, the last traces were hauled away, and all that remained of the enormous factory site was an empty 80-acre field on the south side of South Bend. A contest to name the new development on the site of the former Studebaker plants 1 and 2 was held early in its planning stage. It was decided it would be called Ignition Park, a nod to the memory of Studebaker and an indication of the plans for it to become a home for new startup companies. It was a whole new development to be built literally from the ground up, starting with the preparation of the earth of the huge site. Every bit of brick, metal fragments, glass, and potentially hazardous waste had to be removed. Enormous piles of clean material as well as contaminated debris were placed in the area, and for a while a range of mini-mountains sprang up on the city's south side. Teams of surveyors and engineers were the first to visit the new development. Rather than a haphazard filling in of the area with whatever came along, there was a comprehensive and total involvement goal set to establish density and cohesiveness of the new tech park. Roads were planned to divide and separate the area into smoothly flowing and curving segments, allowing new buildings to be placed at angles and avoiding a controlled, grid-like layout, a true park-like setting. After the road paths were determined, the work of paving, building curves, and laying bricks for parking was carried out. Installation of underground conduits for lighting, as well as drainage systems, were also added. Wide sidewalks were put in on both sides of the new streets. Finally, hundreds of nursery-grown trees were delivered and planted. Construction began on the headquarters building for Idea Realty, the first tech company approved for the site in 2013. The city placed great emphasis on the fact that any new building designed for Ignition Park had to correspond to strict guidelines of appropriateness, with a strong modern visual presentation and high-quality construction. The only existing building on the site previously built was approved to remain. On the virtually blank slate making up the remainder of Ignition Park, more streets, sidewalks, and landscaping was added. In 2014, on a choice section of the west side of the park, new hills of excavated earth and topsoil appeared as ground was broken and construction began on 2 new facilities, Catalyst 1 and Catalyst 2. After 2 years of construction, the Catalyst Buildings 1 and 2 opened in 2017. They are the newest and most extensive addition to Ignition Park. Other plans and projects for the park are now being considered, and hopefully soon other companies will find a new home on the old Studebaker factory site. There are just a few of the Studebaker buildings remaining, Plants 1, Building 84, 113, and 62. Building 62 was the administration building, shown here in 1910, the year it was built. And, as it looks today, awaiting restoration. Building 84, one of the largest 6-story buildings on the original site, shown here in 1923 when it was built, is now being totally renovated. Sample Street, which ran between and divided Plant 1 on the north from Plant 2 on the south, is still a busy 4-lane street. In the distance is Building 84. It's owned by Kevin Smith, a commercial developer from South Bend, who has spent the last several years doing a total interior and exterior renovation, creating additional spaces for tech company development.
And regarding the plans for the building, I've been watching this building since 1979, so I've had any number of plans for it. So I'll just talk about the current plans. And the current plans is to transform it into the Midwest, or one of the largest technology centers in the country. And it's well suited for a number of reasons, because of the fiber and the power and the communicational framework for it. But as well, structurally, it's well adapted to meet those new demands of the new economic fabric. As such, we are starting to bring in companies from all over the world. We have Curt from Ireland. We have F-Cubed, who's doing nanofluids. You have Code School that are teaching coding to the unprivileged and the kids at all. You have InFocus that is working from Notre Dame to integrate to other, whether it's this municipality, the city, or other companies. So what we're doing is creating a platform for others to be successful.
Kevin Smith's restoration and reuse of 2 remaining Plant 1 buildings are apparent in these before photos. They now have been given new life and are once again a living, productive addition to South Bend.
Part of the reason that I've been investing in this part of town is that I believe in this part of town. My investment started in 1979 when I bought the Railroad Express Agency. It extended when I bought the Union Station. So people think that I'm just starting the project, which I'm not. It's an extension on what I started in 1979. And as such, I always thought this was a vibrant part of town that had been neglected. Core infrastructure had been invested, being the rail, the power, and all these core elements that are necessary to build on top of are already here. Not only the buildings, but the core infrastructure. So I started thinking about how do we reintegrate these core infrastructure to provide them as a core asset to the community. And in many ways it pays homage to the Studebaker heritage, because Studebaker is what brought all these core assets to our community. That's why the train stopped. That's why you had power plants. That's why you had schools. That's why you had hospitals. So the expectation that I have is say, look, sometimes we overlook the obvious. The Studebakers unbeknowingly brought all these core infrastructures into focus. We as a community abandoned them, forgot about them. So my job is to pick them up, look at them individually and say, is this still viable or not? And if it's not, forget it. If it's viable, how do I reposition it to integrate those core assets into a platform that will lead us into the 21st century? So that's what I've been doing. That will take another 10 to 20 years. And here's one of those core assets coming by right now. So many times I'm asked, why reuse an old building? You know, why don't you just tear it down and start over? And it's more complicated than you think. We'll talk about the easy stuff. One, this had good bones, meaning it was structurally sound. They don't build them like this anymore. So structurally it made sense. Architecturally it was a significant part of our heritage and I wanted to retain that. The third is a psychological reasons, because especially on this building, this epitomized a failure. And I didn't see it as a failure. I saw it as the community's failure not to reuse what was given to us by the Studebakers. So the first thing I did when I bought the building is we actually celebrated their closing because of all the good they've done for our community. So why did I reuse that building? Because I wanted to lift up the community to show them that literally Studebaker did a great thing for our community. It showed innovation, it put us on a national, international stage. And so my job is to pick up that torch from him and carry it forward and let it be a beacon to show how we can again play on a worldwide stage.
When we tore down some of the old Studebaker buildings, it was because we were not able to find reuses for them. And they had become a blight on the landscape both physically and psychologically for our community. But as we open this up as a new space for research and development, we've seen new energy and new excitement about it. And there's been municipal investment. We have the beautiful Transpo bus facility behind us, which is a LEED certified building, first to go up on the site. Catalyst 1 and Catalyst 2, Data Realty down the street. Great new investments that are taking advantage of that tradition of innovation and excellence, that are attracting young people to our community and helping us to continue to be a vibrant community that is known worldwide for its quality and excellence and its heritage. Years ago there was a book that was called South Bend World Famed, and it talked about all of the industries here in South Bend that had a footprint all across the world, from Studebaker to South Bend Toy to South Bend Range, so many different companies, Bendix and others, that showed South Bend as a real manufacturing center and a center for innovation, center for quality workmanship. As we look to the future, I think South Bend will once again be known as South Bend World Famed. Studebaker has a great legacy still in South Bend. We have streets named after Studebaker, a school was named after Studebaker, but really it's the tradition that they left, a tradition of hard work, of good quality craftsmanship, of innovation and design, Those are the things that we want to build on as our city moves forward. You know, when we think about the legacy of Studebaker and innovation, we know how to make things, and that's a great tradition to have in a community. Studebaker put us on the world stage, and we want to continue to build on that. And we know, though, that manufacturing is different now than it used to be. You don't have thousands and thousands of people in a giant auto plant anymore. Even if you were to have an auto plant, it would be many fewer workers. So what we are really trying to build on in this community is that sense of innovation, of how to create new things and how to make new products. And we look here around at where Studebaker used to exist, now Ignition Park, and it's prepped for that new innovation. We have new companies that have located here. They're doing research and development. We're taking advantage of the Metronet that ties us to the international community through high-speed fiber optic cables. And working with the University of Notre Dame in partnership with their Innovation Park, it really is going to allow new companies to form and start here, to create new jobs, and to build a future that will continue to put South Bend on the map as a place of innovation and high-quality craftsmanship.
South Bend has many beautiful historic buildings, including its 1898 and 1852 courthouses, as well as other magnificent structures and homes from years past. The Historic Preservation Commission of South Bend and St. Joseph County actively monitors and regulates the repairs, maintenance, and general condition of the city and county's architectural treasures, as well as bridges, parks, and streets. They also provide information and research opportunities about individual structures, as well as tours of several local and nationally designated historic neighborhoods. Traffic flows through and around the downtown area from all directions. Like Studebaker did, South Bend benefits from its great location. On the main railroad and highways connecting New York City and Chicago, it also has an international airport, plus it is on the optical fiber lines and has excellent digital access for its tech development future. The city is amply served by fine medical facilities, parks, and recreation areas, and has several colleges and universities. South Bend is the fourth largest city in the state, located 2 hours from Chicago and 1 hour from the white sand beaches and dunes of Lake Michigan. There are many fine old buildings in the city, as well as newer, modern examples. South Bend recovered quickly from the loss of Studebaker, with its population continuing to grow into the 1970s. But in the years that followed, with the loss of manufacturing jobs and its aging population retiring and leaving the city, as well as younger people seeking employment elsewhere, it experienced a decline. The population loss has stabilized in the last 20 years, however. New employers, including tech, information systems, and distribution and materials development, have come to South Bend's west side, who, with Ignition Park companies, are creating jobs again. Recently, several local developers have stepped in with the belief that a strong downtown heart will bring life throughout the downtown, as well as the neighborhoods. This has resulted in several new apartment buildings and even new houses being built in the city and its inner city neighborhoods. Prime locations, some with spectacular views of the St. Joseph River, which flows through South Bend's heart, and others are springing up on long vacant lots. It is hoped that this new construction will bring people back to the downtown, which in turn will support and engender new retail and commercial growth. Perhaps someday, with the new life and employment coming to the city with such endeavors as Ignition Park, South Bend will once again become prominent on the national stage, like it was in the years of its shared glory days with Studebaker. The memory of Studebaker is still apparent throughout South Bend. Fine houses owned by members of the Studebaker family, such as Tippecanoe Place, one of the finest examples of Richardsonian revival in the nation, are the pride of the city. Another home, owned by a former executive, this massively gated estate with its prominent Studebaker initial S has been repurposed as a private school. South Bend offers one many opportunities to spend a day playing golf. Recently celebrating 100 years of operation is the Studebaker Golf Course, open to the public and located in the city's old established neighborhoods of the southeast side. On the city's near west side is the brick Studebaker Street, located next to the historic city cemetery. In the center of downtown South Bend, on the corner of Jefferson Boulevard and Michigan Street, is a new public square. It's on the site, in 1852, of the original Studebaker blacksmith building. It's almost always shady there, surrounded by buildings. You'll find it a nice place to relax, where you can occasionally hear some live music, have lunch, or play a game of giant chess. There are plaques placed around that explain and picture the site's historic status. You realize it's been more than 50 years since Studebaker left the South Bend scene, but its presence is still felt. Everyone had a family member or a friend or knew someone that worked there. The stories and anecdotes come down through the years, and you can still occasionally see a lovingly restored Studebaker car or truck still on the road. The fact that South Bend could be a national and even a world player was proven by the years of Studebaker's success. The memory of those great years and the confidence South Bend had then should be our guide and inspiration for the future.